Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a deeply unsettling part of medical history, one that's often kept hidden in the shadows, even though its devastating human cost literally shaped the foundation of modern science. We're going to examine the stark, well-documented realities of unethical medical experiments conducted by the US government. Now, I'll be upfront with you, this is a grave and urgent topic. But understanding this hidden history, it's absolutely crucial if we want to truly understand the medical rights that you and I rely on today. Okay, let's dive right into this. To really grasp the sheer compounding human toll of these programs, we have to start by looking at the hard numbers from the Tuskegee syphilis study. By 1972, which is when a whistleblower finally exposed what was going on, the damage was already done, and it was catastrophic. Out of the 399 men who participated in the study, 128 contracted syphilis as a direct result. But the nightmare didn't stop there. It spread like wildfire. 40 of their wives were infected. 19 children were born with congenital syphilis, and well over 100 men died from untreated syphilis or related complications. We're talking about entire families, entire lives, just permanently destroyed.
Section 1. The cost of cover-ups.
So get this. It wasn't until 1997, that is a full 25 years after the Tuskegee study was exposed. It took that long for President Bill Clinton to formally apologize on behalf of the government and issue a $10 million settlement to the survivors. But let's be real here. No financial settlement, no matter how big the check is, could ever restore what was actually stolen. Trust, health, human lives, they were just gone forever.
Section 2. MKUltra Mind Control Experiments.
During the height of the Cold War, there was this massive fear of Soviet brainwashing, and that panic led the CIA to create some highly classified psychological torture programs. 149. Just take a second and let the staggering scale of that number sink in. That is not the number of victims. No, that is the number of known government-funded sub-projects under the massive umbrella of Project MKUltra, all of them dedicated to psychological testing and human manipulation. And the methods they used? Absolutely horrifying. The CIA was secretly slipping LSD and other heavy drugs to everyday American citizens entirely without their knowledge. We are talking about hospital patients, people in prison, and even customers at brothels that were secretly operated by the CIA. And why? What was the ultimate goal of this massive secret undertaking? Well, they wanted to discover a truth serum, engineer the perfect spy, and basically figure out how to achieve total human behavior control. And this brilliantly, or rather terrifyingly, illustrates just the sheer brutality of their methods. Between 1957 and 1964, at Allen Memorial Hospital in Montreal, you had a highly respected psychiatrist named Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron. He subjected a patient to a process he called psychic driving. Basically, he pumped this patient full of LSD for 35 days straight. The patient was kept in forced isolation and forced to listen to looped audio messages for 20 hours a day. The trauma inflicted by this kind of psychological torture was absolute, and for the victims, it was permanent. Naturally, these dark secrets were guarded heavily. Project MKUltra remained entirely classified until the 1970s, when the Church Committee hearings finally dragged the ugly truth into the light of day. And while the victims rightfully demanded answers and eventually received settlements, those deep psychological scars, they never fully healed. Section 3. The radiation test subjects. Now, spanning 3 whole decades, from 1944 to 1974, the government authorized another harrowing series of experiments. 194. That is the exact number of prison inmates who had their testicles deliberately exposed to radiation, just so researchers could see exactly how much the human body could withstand. But you know, the horror didn't stop at the prison gates. The scope of this went way further. Targets included patients in mental hospitals, orphan children, and even the elderly living in nursing homes. For instance, doctors at the University of Rochester actually gave hospital patients plutonium injections, completely without their consent, just to study how the radioactive material moved through the human body. So what does this all mean? Well, the outcomes were obviously catastrophic. Victims suffered from severe cancer, infertility, and drastically shortened lifespans. But honestly, perhaps the most terrifying reality of all this is that the families were never warned about the exposure. Because of that cover-up, the poisonous effects of the radiation literally mutated into generational DNA trauma. It was passed directly down to the victims' children, who went on to develop cancers at truly alarming rates. And look, these weren't just isolated, rogue incidents. It was a massive, systemic issue. Just look at this breakdown. In Guatemala, the The U.S. deliberately infected over 1,500 prisoners, mental patients, and sex workers with syphilis. In 1963, at the Jewish Chronic Disease Hospital, researchers injected live cancer cells into elderly patients without telling them. And at Willowbrook, intellectually disabled children were deliberately infected with hepatitis. It was happening everywhere. Which leads us to what is probably the most important question here. How did this happen? How on earth did scientists, doctors, and high-ranking government officials rationalize such sweeping, unimaginable cruelty?
Section 4. A horrifying national pattern. To answer how this happened, we have to shift our focus from the what of the experiments to the who. Who were they targeting? Poor people, Black people, people in prisons, mental hospital patients, people with disabilities, orphan children, indigenous communities. The core thesis across all of our sources is unmistakable. The government consistently and intentionally targeted the vulnerable, the voiceless, and the people who are most easily silenced.
The stark sociological reality documented in the source material is that these studies were fundamentally racist, classist, and dehumanizing. The entire system was built on this horrifying assumption that some lives simply mattered less. Marginalized people were viewed as nothing more than acceptable collateral damage, expendable bodies that could just be sacrificed in the name of medical progress and national security. And because of this systemic targeting, tens of thousands of people were violated. But honestly, we're never actually going to know the true scale of the atrocities. Why? Because the government records were purposefully destroyed by the institutions involved, and the victims were actively silenced. Section 5. The Legacy of Survival. Now, what's really interesting here is that this dark history doesn't just stay in the past. Today, we see a direct critical contrast. Back then, we had a culture of unwitting subjects, viewing whole populations as expendable and using them without their knowledge. But today, the absolute cornerstone of medicine is informed consent. The stringent laws and ethics we benefit from today didn't just magically appear out of nowhere. They were directly born from the intense suffering we've just outlined. Modern regulations, ethical review boards, patient protections, they exist solely because the immense trauma of these victims forced a reckoning. It forced the nation to take a hard look in the mirror and confront its own capacity for institutional cruelty. The apologies, the strict regulations, they only came after decades of blood, suffering, and massive cover-ups. They were instituted to create a firm, unshakable standard of never again. Which leaves us with this incredibly powerful final thought from our sources. The government experiments weren't accidents. They were choices. They were intentional choices made by people in power, enacted upon people who had absolutely no power to stop them. When we look at our medical institutions today, we have to remember the intentionality of power and the hidden stories that pave the way for the rights we hold right now. But it really leaves us to wonder, what hidden choices are being made behind closed doors today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Stay curious, stay informed, and I'll see you next time.